In the sun-baked expanse of the 1st century BC, the winds sweeping across the harsh Arabian desert, what we now know as the arid stretches of modern Jordan and the wider peninsula, carry the scent of an invisible empire. Here, a nomadic people known as the Nabateans are mastering a deadly terrain to feed a voracious Roman and Greek demand for frankincense and myrrh. They do not grow this wealth, nor do they conquer it with broadswords and siege engines. Instead, they monetize the very hostility of the wasteland, controlling a vast logistical web of hidden water and safe passage that no foreign merchant can survive alone. The true drivers of history are rarely the glorious battles of kings or the proud decrees of emperors, but these silent economic engines, the dusty trade routes, the calculated tolls, and the daily grind of survival that actually funds the grandeur of the ancient world. How does a society turn a barren, unnavigable wasteland into the most lucrative toll booth on the earth? Let us step into the shifting sands and uncover the hidden mechanics of a desert monopoly. The story of this massive wealth begins not in the grit of the sand, but on the polished marble streets of Rome. By the dawn of the 1st century, the Roman Empire is utterly addicted to the fragrant smoke of the East. Frankincense is not a mere luxury. It is a fundamental necessity for the spiritual and social machinery of the Mediterranean world. Every temple sacrifice to Jupiter, every vibrant public festival, and every solemn aristocratic funeral requires staggering quantities of these resins. The sweet, heavy smoke is used to mask the overwhelming odours of densely packed city life, to sanitize the air, and most importantly, to carry the prayers of mortals up to the gods. It is a well-documented mainstream historical fact that the Roman historian Pliny the Elder bitterly complained about the massive drain of Roman wealth, an estimated 100 million sesterces annually, flowing eastward into Arabia and beyond to pay for these exotic aromatics. The demand is a bottomless pit, creating an economic vacuum that pulls resources across continents, draining the imperial coffers of precious silver. Yet the producers of this sacred resin live thousands of miles away, isolated on the extreme southern edges of the Arabian Peninsula. To bridge the gap between the harvesters in the humid south and the eager buyers in the Mediterranean ports, the cargo must traverse one of the most unforgiving landscapes on the planet. This is the stark geographic reality, a sprawling, hostile ocean of fractured rock, shifting dunes and relentless, scorching heat. A merchant from Greece or Italy, a man accustomed to paved Roman roads and frequent comfortable way stations, looks upon this inland route with pure, unadulterated terror. The foreigners do not know the hidden pathways. They do not know the subtle language of the winds, or how to read the slight changes in the colour of the sand that indicate an impending suffocating storm. Most importantly, they do not know where the water is hidden. It's precisely this profound ignorance that the Nabateans weaponize. They understand that he who controls the map controls the market entirely. They position themselves not as simple farmers or miners, but as the ultimate middlemen, the undisputed masters of logistics. The hidden logic of their growing empire is beautifully simple. The desert is a locked vault, and they are the only ones holding the key. They begin to establish a highly organized network of transit routes, charging exorbitant fees for the simple right to survive the journey. It is a brilliant monetization of geographic knowledge, turning a liability, the deadly desert, into their greatest asset. Behind the dust of the moving caravans, the stability of this emerging trade network rests heavily on the silent, enduring strength of Nabatean women. While history so often focuses solely on the men leading the pack animals across the dunes, the women are the equal pillars of this civilization. They are the vital anchors of the desert encampments and the guardians of deep generational knowledge. They possess an intricate understanding of resource management, curing meats, preserving precious moisture in treated goatskin bladders, and processing the raw materials necessary for daily survival. It is the women who patiently weave the heavy black goat hair tents that provide the only sanctuary from the blistering midday sun. Their quiet, continuous labour makes the nomadic life possible. Without their mastery of the camps, the caravans would have no base to return to, no safe haven to regroup and heal. They are the cultural bedrock, maintaining the traditions, the family lineages, and the delicate social structures that keep this society unified in the face of brutal, unforgiving conditions. Theirs is a quiet heroism, an essential endurance that builds the very foundation of an empire. As the fragrant cargo slowly makes its way north, carried on the backs of beasts, its value multiplies with every arduous mile. The sheer desperation for the scent creates a market ripe for manipulation. In fact, a rather quirky tidbit of the era involves the widespread ancient fraud of adulteration. Roman merchants, eager to capitalize on the massive markups, would frequently mix pure frankincense with cheaper local tree resins or even crushed pine bark. They hoped to stretch their expensive imported product and maximize their own profits, a testament to just how valuable the pure Arabian resin truly was. The economics of the trade are complex and closely guarded. Historians continue to debate whether the staggering prices recorded by Roman chroniclers were accurate market values reflecting the true cost of the grueling journey, or simply exaggerated complaints from a disgruntled elite frustrated by their absolute reliance on desert nomads. Regardless of the exact figures, the flow of wealth is undeniable and transformative. Silver coins from the Mediterranean pour into the leather pouches of the Nabateans, funding their rise from humble tent dwellers to regional power brokers. But this wealth is hard-won, paid for in sweat and endurance. The journey requires an immense physical toll, a grueling rhythmic march under a merciless sun, where the margin for error is measured in mere drops of water. The ancient merchant is playing a deadly high-stakes game of chess with the climate, and one wrong move means disappearing beneath the sands forever. The Nabateans have monopolized the board, but the environment remains an untamed beast. As the demand from Rome only grows louder and more insistent, the Nabateans must perfect the art of staying alive in a land designed to kill. They need a permanent system, a reliable network of lifelines stretching across the arid expanse to keep the cargo moving safely. But how could a people possibly guarantee a steady supply of water in a landscape where rain is nothing more than a fleeting, unpredictable rumour? The sun climbs higher, bleaching the sky into a pale, breathless dome of heat. In this vast theatre of fractured rock and shifting sand, a profound economic truth takes shape. Wealth is not measured in silver, but in moisture. For a foreign merchant driving a caravan of groaning pack animals, heavy wooden chests overflowing with Roman denarii are entirely useless if his waterskins run dry. The Nabateans understand this fundamental vulnerability deeply. They look at the barren wasteland and see an immense invisible marketplace. They are not farmers bound to a fertile soil, nor are they artisans crafting delicate luxury goods in crowded city workshops. Instead, they become the brilliant architects of a shadow economy, monetizing the very act of survival. It is a masterful shift in human enterprise. Rather than laboring to produce the coveted frankincense and myrrh, they provide the complex logistics required to move it from the humid, distant south to the wealthy northern ports. They sell safety. They sell direction. Most importantly, they sell water. This strategy transforms the deadly desert from a physical barrier into a highly lucrative toll road, where the price of passage is dictated solely by the desperation of the traveller. The markup on survival is infinite when there is no other option. At the heart of this vast commercial web are the desert way stations, temporary havens of life dotting the brutal landscape. Here, beneath the woven awnings, the true backbone of Nabatean stability becomes clearly visible. It is the women who breathe life into these remote encampments, transforming mere coordinates on a map into highly functioning economic hubs. When a battered, dust-choked caravan finally limps out of the shimmering heat haze, it is the women who calmly manage the intricate logistics of their recovery. They oversee the careful distribution of meagre fodder for the exhausted beasts, and they expertly repair the large, treated leather bladders that carry the life-saving water. These women serve as the quiet administrators of the desert economy. They brew restorative teas from harsh, scrubby desert herbs, possessing a deep botanical knowledge passed down through unbroken generations of mothers and daughters. They negotiate the local exchange of provisions, bartering dried dates, hard goat cheese, and heavily salted meats for the foreign silver carried by the merchants. Without their steady, organised management of the camps, the entire overland supply chain would collapse under the weight of the desert's hostility. They are the essential anchors, ensuring that the men guiding the caravans always have a functioning sanctuary waiting for them at the end of a grueling march. To protect this lucrative monopoly, the Nabateans engage in an early, highly effective form of psychological warfare, manipulating the deep anxieties of the wealthy foreigners. A particularly quirky historical tidbit reveals how they actively cultivated terrifying myths to keep competitors at bay. To discourage Greeks and Romans from attempting to bypass the toll network and find the spice forest themselves, the desert nomads spread elaborate, terrifying rumours. whispering dark tales of bloodthirsty winged serpents that fiercely guarded the aromatic trees. They spoke of deadly vipers, toxic winds, and spirits of the sands, painting the deep desert as a realm of supernatural monsters. The wealthy patricians in Rome, terrified by these exotic horrors, were more than willing to pay the staggering markups, entirely unaware that the true danger was simply the heat and the jagged stones. This brilliant manipulation ensures their absolute control over the trade. It is a mainstream historical fact that at its peak, the Nabatean network completely dominated the overland routes linking the Arabian Peninsula to the Mediterranean Levant, effectively funneling the wealth of the East through their hands before it ever reached the bustling, crowded ports of Gaza and Alexandria. Every ounce of resin that burns on a marble altar in Rome has, at some vital point, passed through their meticulous logistical net. They established strict non-negotiable protocols for travel, creating a highly regulated system of guides and armed escorts. A foreign merchant cannot simply wander into the territory hoping for the best. He must hire a local Nabatean navigator, pay exorbitant fees for protection against rival nomadic raiders, and purchase access to the hidden watering holes. It is a comprehensive service industry born of sand and desperate necessity. The desert is vast, but the safe, survivable paths are incredibly narrow, and the Nabateans stand guard at every vital intersection. The exact nature of this territorial control, however, remains a fascinating subject of study. Historians continue to debate whether the Nabateans actively destroyed or concealed natural, alternative water sources to force foreign caravans into total reliance on their specific, heavily taxed way stations, or if they simply outmaneuvered their rivals by building vastly superior infrastructure. What is certain is that their dominance over the landscape is absolute. They treat the unforgiving geography not as a homeland to be defended with high stone walls, but as an invisible asset to be endlessly leveraged. As the decades slowly pass, the continuous heavy flow of silver transforms this nomadic society. The temporary tents of woven black goat hair begin to give way to more permanent structures at the key junctions along the route. The boundless wealth of distant empires is quietly siphoned into the deep desert, exchanged for a handful of dates, a guiding hand, and a precious drink of muddy water. The merchants grumble under their breath. The Roman Senate openly complains of the tremendous expense, but the long caravans keep coming. The Mediterranean addiction to the sweet smoke of the East is far too powerful to break, and the Nabateans stand firmly at the gates, calmly collecting their due. Yet to sell water in a land with no rivers, one must first possess it. The strategy of selling survival is flawless in its economic theory, but it relies entirely on an impossible physical foundation. The desert yields no steady flowing streams, and the rainfall is a violent, remarkably rare occurrence that vanishes into the porous rock almost as quickly as it arrives. To sustain thousands of thirsty travellers and their heavy beasts of burden year after year requires an intervention bordering on the miraculous. But how does a society actually capture and store enough of this fleeting, unpredictable resource to sustain an empire of thirsty travellers? The sky above the arid wasteland rarely offers the mercy of a steady, gentle rain. Instead, when the moisture finally comes, it arrives with sudden, terrifying violence. In the brief, cold winter months, sudden storms break over the distant, jagged mountains, sending massive walls of water tearing through the narrow, dry canyons known as wadis. To a foreign traveller, these flash floods are a deadly hazard, a sudden, deafening roar into the canyons that can sweep away entire caravans in a matter of moments. The dry earth cannot absorb the deluge quickly enough, and the water rushes violently over the baked crust of the desert. But to the Nabateans, this violent weather is the very lifeblood of their empire. They do not run from the floods, they catch them. To master the desert, one must master the fleeting, unpredictable presence of water. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Nabateans carved thousands of bell-shaped cisterns directly into the solid limestone bedrock across the trade routes, creating a vast, invisible subterranean reservoir system. These hidden vaults are an absolute marvel of ancient engineering. By carving the chambers with a narrow bottle-like neck at the surface that flares out into a massive cavernous belly underground, they achieve two vital goals. First, the narrow opening strictly minimises the devastating evaporation caused by the scorching Arabian sun. Second, the shape allows the deep earth itself to keep the stored water cool, dark and fresh for many long rainless months on end. But digging a massive hole in porous sedimentary rock is simply not enough. Without a proper watertight seal, the precious collected water would simply seep back into the dry earth, leaving the cistern empty and the desert travellers doomed. The rock must be rendered entirely waterproof. This requires a specialized, highly durable hydraulic plaster made from a careful traditional mixture of burnt lime, fine ash, and crushed terracotta pottery. Here, in the cool echoing dark of the empty cisterns during the punishing dry season, the quiet strength of Nabatean women is clearly felt. While the men are often away guiding the massive merchant trains across the shifting dunes, the women take on the critical responsibility of maintaining this vital, life-saving infrastructure. They descend deep into the dark, bell-shaped chambers, their hands carefully applying fresh layers of the heavy, wet plaster to the rough walls, sealing any hairline cracks with meticulous, patient precision. They understand the heavy burden of their task. It is a quiet, shadowed labour, far removed from the bustling, vibrant markets of Rome, yet the entire international incense trade rests entirely upon the integrity of their daily work. If the plaster fails, the water vanishes into the dust. If the water vanishes, the caravans die. The women hold the true wealth of the kingdom in their calloused hands, preserving the fragile moisture that keeps their people and their economy alive. To control this water is to hold absolute power over the harsh landscape. The Nabateans engineer intricate networks of shallow catchment channels carefully carved into the rocky hillsides, designed to catch the brief winter runoff and funnel it directly into their hidden cisterns. They build small, subtle dams across the wadis to gently slow the raging floodwaters, allowing the heavy desert sediment to settle before the clear, clean water is carefully guided into the underground vaults. Yet the true genius of their system lies not just in the engineering, but in the total concealment of the resource. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals that the Nabateans actively disguised the narrow openings of their cisterns to keep them entirely hidden from thirsty competitors and hostile foreign armies. They would carefully cover the mouths of the water vaults with heavy desert brush, loose sand, and flat stones, marking their exact locations only with seemingly random piles of rubble or subtle, abstract petroglyphs. To an exhausted Roman patrol or a rival nomadic tribe, the landscape appeared as a totally barren, waterless death trap. But to a Nabatean guide who knew how to read the hidden signs scratched into the rocks, the desert was a well-stocked pantry dotted with secret life-saving oases. This brilliant deception allows them to traverse the deep desert with total impunity, moving invisibly across a landscape that crushes any outsider attempting to follow them. They can disappear into the trackless wastes like ghosts, surviving for weeks on hidden water reserves that no one else can ever find. The origins of this masterful landscape-altering water management remain a subject of deep scholarly fascination. Historians continue to debate whether the Nabateans adapted this sophisticated hydraulic technology from the neighbouring older Edomite cultures who previously inhabited the rocky region, or if they developed these complex techniques entirely independently, driven by the sheer unforgiving pressure of their arid environment. Whatever the exact origin, they perfect the craft to a level never before seen in the ancient world, turning a harsh physical limitation into a profound economic advantage. The sheer scale of the water needed to sustain the massive spice trade is staggering to consider. A single mature dromedary camel, carrying hundreds of pounds of fragrant frankincense under the beating sun, can drink upwards of 30 gallons of water in a single sitting after a long, grueling journey. A typical commercial caravan might consist of hundreds, sometimes even thousands, of these massive beasts of burden. The amount of water required just to keep the animals moving, let alone the wealthy merchants, the paid guides and the armed guards, is an astronomical logistical burden. Every drop must be carefully accounted for, every hidden cistern strictly monitored. The concealed water network is the true beating heart of the Nabatean monopoly. It transforms the deadly desert into a tightly controlled, highly profitable highway, where the price of a cool drink is weighed directly against Roman silver. The foreign merchants who finally arrive at these secret way stations are often broken, their lips cracked, their eyes wild with the relentless heat. They do not argue about the cost of the tolls. They gladly open their heavy wooden chests, eagerly trading their hard-earned coins for the simple, profound privilege of drinking from a damp clay cup. The desert is conquered not by the bloody swing of a sword, but by the careful, deliberate capture of the rain. The entire flow of global wealth, the fragrant, heavy smoke rising from the marble altars of distant empires, is entirely dependent on a network of plastered holes in the ground, hidden silently beneath the shifting sands. But capturing and storing the water in the deep desert is only half the battle. Once the hidden cisterns are full, someone must stand guard at these remote, lonely outposts. Someone must carefully ration the lifeblood of the desert, manage the complex physical needs of the exhausted merchants arriving from the dunes, and maintain the fragile, peaceful order of the encampments. When the men are away navigating the trackless sands, who are the quiet sentinels holding these vital economic hubs together? The horizon ripples with the brutal, distorting waves of midday heat, obscuring the jagged line where the sky meets the sand. Out of this blinding haze, a line of exhausted figures slowly materializes. It is a merchant train, battered by the wind and choked by the dust, dragging the heavy wealth of the southern incense forests toward the Mediterranean. The men leading the beasts are entirely spent, their faces wrapped in coarse cloth to block the stinging grit, their water skins hanging limp and hollow. For days they have moved through an ocean of stone, surviving purely on the promises of their Nabatean guides. Then, nestled in the shadow of a towering sandstone cliff, the sanctuary appears. It is a desert way station, a bustling, organised enclave of black, woven tents and low stone walls. And standing ready to receive this desperate procession are the women of the oasis. These women are the quiet sentinels of the trade routes, the absolute anchors of a moving economy. When the men are away navigating the trackless wastes, guiding the massive caravans across the dunes, the women remain to hold the territory. They do not merely wait in the shadows, they actively govern these vital logistical hubs. As the caravan limps into the safety of the compound, the women step forward to orchestrate the immediate chaos of arrival. They possess a calm, commanding authority, born of deep experience and an intimate understanding of desert survival. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Nabateans designed their trade network with meticulous precision, spacing these specialized way stations known as caravanserais roughly 20 to 25 miles apart, the exact distance a heavily laden pack animal could march in a single day. These outposts formed a continuous, unbroken chain of life across the barren interior. Yet, an outpost is merely a collection of empty tents and stone corrals without the human administration required to run it. The women provide this essential management. They hold the keys to the concealed cisterns. With measured, careful movements, they oversee the breaking of the clay seals on the underground water vaults, rationing the precious moisture with a strict, unforgiving logic. They understand that every single drop is an economic asset, and they distribute it first to the valuable beasts of burden, then to the paying merchants, and finally for the daily needs of the camp. They are the accountants of survival, keeping a mental ledger of supplies, predicting the arrival of the next caravan, and ensuring the outpost never runs dry. Their labour is continuous and deeply demanding. Beneath the shade of the woven awnings, they process the heavy, raw grains necessary to feed the transient population, grinding wheat and barley between heavy basalt stones, a rhythmic, exhausting physical effort that echoes quietly through the camp. They tend to the small hidden gardens tucked into the rocky crevices, cultivating the bitter desert herbs used to brew restorative teas for the heat-stricken travellers. When a wealthy Roman merchant collapses from exhaustion, it is the local women who administer the cooling poultices and bitter medicines, pulling the foreigners back from the brink of heatstroke. In this harsh environment, their social and economic standing is remarkably distinct from their contemporaries in the Mediterranean. A truly fascinating and rather quirky historical tidbit reveals that Nabatean women enjoyed an astonishing level of legal independence. Unlike the women of Rome or Greece who lived under the strict legal guardianship of their fathers or husbands, many Nabatean women possessed the right to own property outright, execute independent business contracts, and hold their own legal seals. Uncovered ancient inscriptions show women independently owning commercial way stations, commanding vast herds of livestock and managing their own wealth. They were not merely labourers in these desert outposts. In many cases, they were the absolute proprietors, the chief executives of these remote, highly profitable enterprises. This profound level of autonomy inevitably raises questions about the full extent of their power. In fact, historians continue to debate whether the elite women who managed the largest, most critical way stations held formal administrative or even military titles, commanding the local armed guards who protected the water sources, or if their immense authority was derived entirely from an informal, culturally ingrained respect. Regardless of official titles, their functional power is undeniable. A merchant who insults the matron of a caravanserai risks being denied water, a penalty that carries an absolute, undeniable death sentence in the deep desert. As the sun sets and the punishing heat finally breaks, the camp transforms. The air cools rapidly, and the smell of roasting salt-cured meats and burning brushwood fills the dark enclave. The women move between the low fires, negotiating the quiet trade of supplies. They barter fresh dates, woven ropes, and hard goat cheese for the small silver coins the foreigners carry. It is a subtle, localized economy existing within the massive, international flow of the incense trade. They extract their own tolls, quietly accumulating wealth and ensuring the stability of their extended families. Their endurance is the unseen foundation of the entire empire. They bear the heavy, silent burden of waiting, watching the empty horizon for the dust clouds that signal the return of their sons, brothers, and husbands. They maintain the complex cultural traditions of their people, weaving the heavy fabrics, preserving the ancient stories, and providing the deep emotional sanctuary that makes the brutal nomadic lifestyle endurable. They are the steady heartbeat of a society that exists in constant, exhausting motion. When the morning light eventually breaks over the sandstone ridges, painting the desert in stark shades of crimson and gold, the caravan must prepare to move again. The heavy chests of frankincense are loaded, the water skins are filled and carefully stitched shut by the women, and the merchants pay their final tolls. The camp returns to its quiet, watchful state, ready for the next wave of desperate travellers. Yet as the merchants look out at the vast, intimidating expanse of sand that still lies between them and the safety of the northern markets, a daunting reality sets in. Even with the hidden cisterns full and the outposts managed with absolute brilliance, the sheer physical weight of the cargo remains a monumental obstacle. No human could possibly drag such a fortune across the shifting dunes, and traditional horses would quickly perish in the deep sands. What magnificent, enduring creature possessed the iron constitution and the perfect anatomical design to serve as the ultimate cargo vessel of this dry, unforgiving ocean? The golden dunes of the Arabian interior form an ocean of silica, a shifting, treacherous surface that behaves more like water than solid earth. To move hundreds of tons of precious frankincense and myrrh across this punishing expanse, traditional methods of ancient transport are entirely useless. Heavy wooden carts, the trusted backbone of Roman logistics, would immediately sink to their axles in the soft, bottomless sand, trapping the precious cargo forever. Majestic, muscular horses, bred for the paved roads of the Mediterranean or the firm, grassy plains of the north, would quickly sweat away their body's moisture, collapsing under the terrifying heat in a matter of hours. The desert demands a completely different kind of vessel. It requires an animal forged in the very furnace of the wasteland, a creature of supreme endurance and highly specialized design. Out of the shimmering heat haze, the solution emerges with a slow, swaying, deliberate gait. It is the dromedary, the one-humped Arabian camel. To the unaccustomed Roman or Greek eye, it is a strangely proportioned, ungainly beast, lacking the sleek, elegant lines of a cavalry stallion. Yet beneath its coarse hair and famously aloof demeanour lies an absolute masterpiece of evolutionary engineering. The camel is the ultimate cargo ship of the sand, a living, breathing marvel that makes the entire international incense trade physically possible. Every single inch of the dromedary is perfectly adapted to outlast the deadly hostility of the environment. Its feet are not hard hooves that would pierce and sink into the dunes, but broad, leathery pads that spread out upon impact. These soft, expanding feet act exactly like natural snowshoes, keeping the massive beast floating gracefully on top of the loose, shifting sand. When the dreaded, violent winds howl and the sky turns into a blinding, suffocating wall of flying grit, the camel simply lowers its heavy head. It possesses long, thick eyelashes and secondary translucent eyelids that act as built-in goggles, wiping the sand away while still allowing the animal to clearly see the path ahead. It can even pinch its muscular nostrils completely shut, seamlessly sealing its respiratory system against the choking, lethal dust. It is a mainstream historical fact that the widespread domestication and strategic use of the dromedary camel fundamentally unlocked the Arabian overland routes, transforming a fragmented, localized bartering system into a massive, intercontinental trade network. Without this specific beast of burden, the interior of the peninsula would have remained an impenetrable, silent void. The camel's most famous feature, the hump, is the key to this absolute mastery. Contrary to the persistent ancient myths that it acts as a hollow reservoir for sloshing water, the hump is actually a massive mound of concentrated fatty tissue, sometimes weighing up to 80 pounds. By concentrating its body fat in this single localized mound, the camel cleverly avoids insulating its entire body, allowing vital body heat to easily escape into the air and keeping its core temperature perfectly regulated. When food and water vanish from the landscape, the camel's body slowly breaks down this fat, converting it into vital energy and life-saving metabolic water. The careful management of these incredible beasts is a subtle art form unto itself. The journey is incredibly long, the cargo is heavy, and the animals can be famously stubborn if mishandled by their amateur guides. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals that ancient cameleers did not rely solely on harsh whips or angry shouts to keep the miles rolling by. Instead, they used the soothing power of song. The handlers would sing specific melodic, rhythmic chants, known as huda, to their herds. They used the steady, pulsing tempo of their voices as a living metronome. The camels, remarkably sensitive to rhythm and sound, would naturally match their lumbering gait to the song, walking in a synchronized hypnotic trance that kept the entire massive caravan moving efficiently without unnecessary exhaustion or sudden panic. The sheer scale of these moving cities is difficult to fully comprehend. A single healthy dromedary can easily carry up to 400 pounds of cargo strapped tightly in woven saddlebags. Now, envision a grand caravan stretching to the distant horizon, comprised of 2,000 or 3,000 of these beasts, tied head to tail in long, undulating strings. The air around them is thick with a startling contradiction of scents, the rich, heavenly perfume of raw frankincense baking slowly in the sun, sharply cut by the pungent, earthy musk of the sweating, grunting herd. Behind the dust of the trail at the essential way stations dotting the rocky route, the profound value of the camel extends far beyond mere transportation. Here, the women of the Nabatean outpost utilize the animal as a complete self-sustaining resource. They expertly milk the temperamental mares, gathering a thick, highly nutritious liquid that provides vital protein and sustenance in a stark landscape completely devoid of fresh agriculture. In the spring, when the beasts naturally shed their thick winter coats, the women carefully gather the coarse, durable hair. With endless, quiet patience, they spin this raw material into the heavy yarn used to weave their dark tents, creating the very shelters that keep the lethal sun at bay. The camel is not merely a specialized tool for moving cargo, it is the absolute breathing foundation of their entire civilization, touching every aspect of their daily survival. The origins of the most elite, high-performing herds remain a deeply studied mystery. Historians continue to debate whether the Nabateans managed highly sophisticated selective breeding programs themselves, carefully engineering distinct, specialized bloodlines for heavy, plodding freight versus swift, agile desert scouts, or if they primarily purchased their finest, strongest beasts from deeply isolated, specialized nomadic tribes dwelling further south in the great sandy voids. Whatever the true source of their livestock, the Nabateans command the absolute finest logistical fleet in the ancient world. As the long strings of heavily laden dromedaries slowly plod northward step by agonizing step, they carry the wealth of distant empires on their scarred, calloused backs. They are an unstoppable force of sheer endurance, capable of surviving for over a week without a single drop of water, chewing thoughtfully on dry, thorny acacia branches that would tear the mouths of any other creature to bloody ribbons. They conquer the brutal geography, dragging the precious resins closer and closer to the lucrative, eager markets of the Mediterranean. They bring the desperate merchants directly to the threshold of unimaginable wealth. Yet the physical journey across the sand is only half the battle. As these massive living ships navigate the invisible lanes of the desert, approaching the vital, heavily guarded choke points of the trade route, a new bureaucratic obstacle quietly arises. The foreign merchants have survived the terrifying landscape and the grueling march, but how high will the cost of their survival climb when the masters of the desert finally demand their toll? The endless horizon of shifting dunes gradually gives way to a labyrinth of towering, wind-sculpted rock. The open ocean of sand narrows into tight, shadowed canyons. For the exhausted foreign merchants, this change in the landscape signals a brief respite from the lethal sun, but it also marks the beginning of a different kind of trial. Here, at the narrow choke points of the trade route, the raw struggle for physical survival transforms into a ruthless, highly organized bureaucratic machine. The Nabateans have saved these men from the desert, but the rescue is not an act of charity. It is a calculated service, and the final accounting is about to be presented. As the long, dusty strings of camels are brought to a halt beneath the watchful eyes of armed guards stationed on the high ridges, the true genius of the Nabatean economy reveals itself. They do not merely charge a single flat fee for safe passage. Instead, they have engineered a layered, inescapable web of tariffs that extracts maximum value from every single caravan. It is a mainstream historical fact that the cost of moving luxury goods through this territory was staggeringly high, systematically draining the profit margins of the Greek and Roman merchants before they ever reached the Mediterranean ports. Every aspect of the journey is monetized. there is a specific tax levied on each individual camel load of frankincense. There is a toll for simply crossing the territorial border. There is a mandatory fee for the armed escorts who supposedly protect the merchants from rogue desert raiders. Raiders who, conveniently, rarely seem to attack those who have paid their dues in full. This brilliant system of localized taxation is far more complex than simple extortion. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals the exhausting extent of this ancient bureaucracy. Records indicate that merchants were forced to pay a myriad of highly specific, almost frustratingly petty fees at every major stop. They had to pay a mandatory tax to the local temple priests, supposedly to appease the regional deities and ensure safe weather. They were required to pay the royal secretaries just to have their travel documents officially marked. They even had to pay a designated tip to the king's personal gatekeepers. By the time a merchant had satisfied the priests, the scribes, the guards, and the guides, a significant portion of his precious silver had already vanished into the leather pouches of the desert dwellers. Beneath the grand, kingdom-wide decrees of royal taxation, the daily granular reality of this massive wealth transfer takes place quietly within the woven walls of the way stations. Here, the women of the encampments manage the complex localized barter that keeps the caravans moving. While the king's officials might tally the heavy chests of silver for the grand tariffs, the women are the strict, uncompromising accountants of daily survival. They hold the precise measures for water, grain, and fodder. When a Roman merchant needs an extra ration of moisture for a failing beast, he must negotiate directly with the matron of the camp. She does not accept vague promises or imperial titles. She requires hard, tangible value. The women expertly weigh the small silver denarii, their keen eyes checking for clipped edges or counterfeit metal. They trade life-saving resources for fine textiles, durable metal tools, and foreign coins, quietly accumulating significant personal and familial wealth. Their meticulous record-keeping, often tracked through simple physical tokens or deep memory, ensures that the local oasis remains profitable and well-stocked. They are the steady hands that collect the true price of the desert, piece by piece, drop by drop. The origins of this incredibly effective, inescapable toll system remain a subject of intense scholarly focus. Historians continue to debate whether this highly organized network of tariffs evolved directly from the ancient, violent practice of tribal raiding, essentially functioning as a formalized, bloodless protection racket negotiated over centuries, or if it was meticulously designed from the beginning by a centralized Nabatean authority, deliberately mimicking the sophisticated customs houses of the Ptolemaic and Roman empires. Whatever its true origin, the result is a flawless economic filter. The Nabateans do not need to risk the long, dangerous sea voyages to India, nor do they need to bleed the sacred trees in the sweltering southern forests. They simply cast a wide, invisible net across the only navigable paths of the wasteland, and the wealth of the world willingly walks right into it. For the merchants, the frustration is immense, but the mathematics of their addiction leave them entirely powerless. The demand for incense in the temples of Rome is so absolute, and the social pressure to burn the fragrant resins at public funerals is so high that the wealthy classes will pay almost any price to secure the supply. The merchants grumble, they curse the heat, and they curse the endless layers of Nabatean bureaucracy, but they always pay. They unlock their heavy wooden chests, counting out the silver coins under the cold, indifferent gaze of the desert guards. Slowly, relentlessly, the wealth of the Mediterranean is siphoned into the arid interior. The sheer volume of silver flowing into the hands of these formerly nomadic people is staggering, transforming their entire society at a fundamental level. They are no longer just survivors of the wasteland, they are the undisputed lords of a massive intercontinental supply chain. The woven black tents of the deep desert are slowly supplemented by grander ambitions, funded by a river of foreign coin that never runs dry. But this massive accumulation of physical wealth creates a new, incredibly dangerous problem. Silver is heavy, it is highly coveted, and in the lawless expanse of the ancient world it attracts the greedy eyes of rival empires and ruthless warlords. A society cannot simply leave mountains of Roman coins sitting under a goat hair tent. They cannot carry the accumulated fortune of a generation on the backs of their herds forever. To protect their newfound economic supremacy, they need a sanctuary, an impenetrable vault capable of guarding the riches of a kingdom. But where in this cracked, sun-baked earth could a people possibly build a fortress strong enough to lock the world out? The answer to guarding the accumulated wealth of an empire lies hidden within the rugged, impassable folds of the Shara Mountains. Here, the earth itself provides a defense far superior to any man-made wall of brick or timber. To protect the staggering influx of Roman silver, The Nabateans do not build a traditional fortress on a high, exposed hill. Instead, they retreat into the deep, shadowed fissures of the bedrock. They establish their capital, the legendary city of Petra, inside a natural, impregnable vault created by the violent tectonic forces of the ancient past. To even approach this hidden metropolis, a traveller must first survive a terrifying geological bottleneck. The primary entrance is a winding, claustrophobic gorge known as the Sick. It is a massive tear in the mountain, over a mile long, where the sheer sandstone cliffs rise hundreds of feet into the air, sometimes narrowing to a gap barely wide enough for two camels to walk shoulder to shoulder. As a merchant caravan leaves the blinding glare of the open desert and steps into this shadowed chasm, the temperature drops rapidly. The sounds of the outside world are swallowed by the deep, echoing silence of the stone. This narrow corridor is an absolute masterpiece of natural defence. An entire invading army, even the highly disciplined, heavily armoured legions of Rome, would be rendered entirely useless in this constricted space. They cannot march in formation. They cannot deploy their devastating cavalry. A mere handful of Nabatean guards positioned high above on the rim of the canyon could easily destroy an invading force by simply raining rocks and arrows down into the inescapable trap. The geography itself acts as an insurmountable shield, ensuring that the vast treasury of the kingdom remains perfectly safe from the grasping hands of rival empires. The Nabateans are acutely aware of the psychological power this dark, intimidating entrance holds over foreign visitors. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals how they enhanced this natural intimidation with spiritual security. All along the twisting walls of the Sick, they carved numerous small, faceless blocks of stone known as beetles, literal representations of their ancient deities. These were not elaborate statues, but stark, unblinking geometric shapes protruding from the rock. To the weary merchants walking the gauntlet below, these silent stone blocks served as divine checkpoints, a heavy psychological reminder that the gods themselves were watching every single coin and every ounce of resin brought into the valley. Emerging from the long, dark birth canal of the Sikhi, the traveller is finally thrust into a sprawling, sunlit basin completely surrounded by towering walls of rose-red rock. It is here that the true, staggering scale of Nabatean wealth is put on display. They do not merely build a city within this basin, they carve it directly out of the living mountain. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Nabatean stonecutters utilised an ingenious, highly dangerous top-down carving method. Rather than hauling massive, heavy stones up from the valley floor and building precarious wooden scaffolding, which would require vast amounts of timber they simply did not possess, they started at the very top of the cliff face. They chiselled a flat ledge and then slowly hacked their way downward, carving intricate columns, massive pediments, and deep, echoing chambers directly out of the solid bedrock. As the temporary woven tents of the desert slowly transform into these permanent, sprawling estates of stone, the role of Nabatean women evolves in tandem, seamlessly shifting from the deep desert to the urban core. The matriarchs who once managed the dusty, isolated way stations now manage vast, multi-generational wealth within the city walls. They are no longer simply bartering goat cheese for silver, they are actively financing the grand architectural projects that define the capital. Ancient legal papyri and stone inscriptions preserved from the era paint a vivid picture of these powerful urban women. They purchase large, lucrative orchards in the terraced valleys, they legally inherit massive trading syndicates, and they commission the creation of the grand rock-cut chambers. When a wealthy merchant family requires a lasting monument to project their status, it is often the women who hold the purse strings, directing the intricate, expensive labour of the stonecutters. They sit at the heart of the great trading houses, surrounded by the finest imported silks and exotic spices, yet they retain the sharp, uncompromising business acumen forged in the unforgiving heat of the desert camps. Their steady, calculated management of the family estates ensures that the wealth brought in by the caravans is preserved, invested, and grown across generations. The spectacular rock-cut facades that line the canyon walls are a testament to this incredible concentration of capital, but their exact function remains heavily scrutinized. Historians continue to debate whether these monumental carved structures were built strictly as grand royal mausoleums to house the dead, or if they served a more dynamic, practical purpose as active administrative centres, grand dining halls, and highly secure treasury spaces for the elite merchant families. The lines between the sacred and the commercial are beautifully blurred in Petra, where the sheer display of wealth is an act of deep religious devotion in itself. This hidden city of stone is a true economic miracle, a bustling cosmopolitan metropolis of tens of thousands, completely concealed from the empires that fund its existence. The Nabateans have successfully monetized the wasteland, taxed the weary travellers, and built an impenetrable vault to guard their overflowing fortunes. They have constructed the perfect logistical machine, yet beneath the intricate stone carvings and the heavy chests of Roman silver, a stark reality remains. The entire grand edifice of Petra, every paved street and every carved column, is built entirely upon the fragile foundation of a distant, sticky sap. The Nabateans control the roads, but they do not control the soil that gives life to the sacred trees. Far away, at the very edge of the known world, someone must still bleed the bark. What immense physical labour, and what harsh, humid reality is required to actually harvest the fragrant resin that fuels this magnificent empire of stone. Thousands of miles south of Petra's red rock, the landscape shifts dramatically. Here, in the rugged, mountainous coastal regions of southern Arabia, the lands known today as Oman and Yemen, the air does not taste of dry, biting desert dust, but of heavy, enveloping sea mist. This is the true origin of the empire's wealth. The grand, stone-carved treasury of the Nabateans rests entirely on the back of a remarkably unassuming plant. The boswellia tree is not a towering, majestic timber like the cedars of Lebanon. It is a gnarled, scrubby, almost defiant thing clinging stubbornly to the rocky, sun-baked limestone slopes. It's a mainstream historical fact that this specific, highly isolated region holds a strict geographical monopoly on the finest incense in the ancient world, born from a unique, highly localized climatic phenomenon. During the summer months, a seasonal monsoon brings a thick, life-giving fog that rolls off the Arabian Sea, bathing the harsh, rocky plateaus in dense moisture before burning off rapidly under the intense afternoon sun. This precise, punishing balance of searing heat and sudden, heavy humidity creates the perfect internal alchemy within the bark of the wild trees. To extract this wealth, the local harvesters must perform a delicate, physically punishing surgery. The process is not a gentle gathering of ripe fruit or falling leaves, but a deliberate, calculated wounding. The mechanics of the harvest require deep patience and precision. Using a specialized, sharp, axe-like tool, the harvester strikes the trunk, stripping away a narrow, shallow strip of the papery outer bark. From this raw, exposed wound, a milky white sap immediately begins to ooze, bleeding slowly down the rough texture of the trunk. This is the tree's natural defense mechanism in action, a resinous scab forming to seal the violent injury. The harvesters, however, do not collect this first bleeding. This initial sap is considered inferior, too heavily mixed with the raw wood. Instead, the wound is left exposed to the blistering heat for 2 to 3 weeks, allowing the sun to bake the liquid into hardened, crusty tears. This first yield is scraped away and discarded, or kept for cheap local use. The tree is then wounded again in the exact same spot. This second bleeding produces a much higher quality resin. Yet, it is the third and final tapping of the season that yields the absolute finest, purest product, the translucent, highly aromatic tears that drive the distant Roman economy into a frenzy. The physical labour of this cyclical harvesting is intensely grueling. It requires the workers to constantly navigate treacherous, steep ravines in suffocating, breathless humidity. Their calloused hands and their iron tools become permanently coated in a thick, unyielding, sticky residue that traps the dark soil and refuses to wash away. The heavy woven baskets they carry upon their backs grow painfully dense as the day wears on, filled with the hardened tears of the forest. The extreme value of this crop breeds a culture of intense, almost fearful spiritual caution among the labourers. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals the deep superstition surrounding the process. Roman historians recorded that the men who tapped the sacred trees were subjected to strict ritual purity laws during the long harvest season. To prevent entirely polluting the divine sap, these labourers were completely forbidden from attending local funerals, touching the dead, or even engaging in intimate relations with their spouses until the final golden tear of resin was safely gathered from the slopes. The harvest was treated not merely as grueling agriculture, but as a highly sensitive, fragile religious rite that could easily be ruined by mortal impurity. Yet the exact social and economic standing of these essential workers remains a complex puzzle. Historians continue to debate whether the harvesters were heavily exploited labourers, tightly controlled and heavily taxed by the powerful centralised kings of the southern Arabian kingdoms, or if they were fiercely independent, highly respected tribal families who guarded their ancestral secret groves, negotiating directly with the northern merchants from a position of absolute strength. Once the raw, sticky lumps are carried down from the punishing mountainsides, the crucial next phase of the economic machine begins. Down in the shaded, bustling compounds of the southern settlements, the women of the harvest families take over. The raw resin brought from the hills is a chaotic, unsorted mix of stray bark, desert dust, and varying grades of sap. It is the women who meticulously process this raw fortune. They sit for endless hours on heavy woven mats, their experienced eyes instantly judging the exact colour, opacity, and size of every single piece. They possess an encyclopedic generational knowledge of the product. With swift, practiced motions, they separate the cloudy, yellowish clumps destined for common temple use from the pure, translucent, silvery white drops known as hajari, the absolute highest grade destined exclusively for the private altars of the Roman elite. Their labour requires immense patience and sharp, unforgiving quality control. Without their rigorous sorting, the resin would lose its premium, tiered value in the distant northern markets. They are the silent, steadfast curators of the world's most luxurious commodity, ensuring that when a Nabatean caravan finally arrives to purchase the year's yield, the sorted product commands the absolute highest price in pure silver. Finally, heavy leather sacks of graded frankincense are loaded onto the groaning dromedaries. The massive concentrated wealth of the southern mountains is now fully mobile, ready to begin the terrifying journey north across the trackless wastes. The Nabatean merchants, having paid exorbitant prices at the source, turn their heavily guarded caravans to face the empty, shifting horizon. They carry a king's ransom in hardened, fragrant sap, but the immense dunes ahead offer no paved Roman roads, no carved signposts, and no permanent visible landmarks. The landscape is a fluid, moving ocean of sand that constantly erases its own paths. One wrong turn, one slight miscalculation in direction, means disappearing into the deep desert forever. How does a solitary navigator reliably guide thousands of beasts and men across a featureless, blinding wasteland without ever losing the way? The sun finally sinks below the jagged horizon, painting the vast expanse of the Arabian desert in rapidly cooling shades of violet and indigo. For a Roman merchant travelling with the caravan, the fading light brings a profound sense of dread. The landscape ahead is a terrifying, featureless ocean of silica. There are no paved roads cutting through the dunes, no carved stone milestones marking the distance, and no visible tracks left by previous travellers. The relentless whispering winds erase the heavy footprints of 1,000 camels in a matter of minutes, leaving the earth looking utterly untouched. To step into this moving, shifting void without a guide is to step into an open grave. Yet, the Nabatean navigators do not panic as the darkness falls, they welcome it. To maintain their absolute monopoly on movement, these masters of the desert have developed a highly guarded system of navigation that relies not on the earth, but on the sky. Moving during the brutal heat of the day is a foolish waste of precious water and human endurance. Instead, the grand caravans become nocturnal creatures, resting beneath woven awnings under the sun and marching under the cold, clear canopy of the night. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Nabateans possessed a deeply sophisticated mathematical understanding of astronomy, a truth permanently etched into the very architecture of their capital. They meticulously aligned their grandest temples and sacred stone monuments in Petra to capture the exact rays of the sun during the winter solstice and equinoxes. Out in the deep desert, this profound celestial knowledge serves a highly practical, life-saving purpose. The guides read the shifting constellations as a flawless, uncorrupted map. They calculate their latitude by the height of the pole star and track the slow rotation of the zodiac across the black vault of the sky, ensuring their heavy, laden beasts maintain a true and perfect heading across the trackless wastes. However, the stars can only provide a broad general direction. To actually survive the journey, to find the hidden, life-saving systems and avoid the treacherous sinks of deep, impassable sand, a guide must possess an intimate micro-level understanding of the ground itself. They must learn to read the subtle language of the wasteland. They observe the precise angle and spacing of the wind-rippled sand, knowing that certain weather patterns shape the dunes in highly specific directions. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals the astonishing sensory depths of this localized knowledge. Ancient accounts suggest that elite desert guides possessed the uncanny ability to navigate by tasting the earth and smelling the wind. In the dead of night, a master navigator might halt the caravan, dismount, and place a small pinch of sand upon his tongue. By identifying the faint specific mineral composition, a trace of ancient salt or a heavy limestone dust, he could pinpoint their exact location within a territory hundreds of miles wide. Furthermore, they trained themselves to catch the incredibly faint, cool scent of damp earth or hidden scrub brush on the evening breeze, literally sniffing out concealed water sources that lay hidden beyond the visible horizon. The preservation of this immense, complex mental map is the true foundation of the Nabatean Empire. This knowledge is not locked away in grand marble libraries or carved into heavy public tablets. It is a living, breathing database, and its primary guardians are the women of the desert encampments. While the men walk the routes, the women serve as the vital generational vessels of this navigational lore. Within the cool shade of the way stations, they actively teach the geography of the wasteland to the young. The intricate pathways, the locations of the hidden wells, and the names of the stars are woven directly into the cultural fabric of the society. The mothers sing complex, rhythmic, memorized chants to their children, songs that double as precise auditory maps of the trade routes. Furthermore, as they patiently loom the heavy, dark fabrics for their tents, they often weave subtle, geometric patterns that reflect the very constellations that guide their people. They surround their families with the physical representation of survival. Without the women relentlessly grounding this celestial and terrestrial knowledge into the daily culture, the fragile mental map of the kingdom would simply vanish in a single generation. The exact nature of how this information was shared and protected, however, remains a fascinating mystery. Historians continue to debate whether the Nabatean navigators relied entirely on this vast, complex, oral tradition and strict generational memory, or if they secretly possessed physical, highly guarded maps drawn on fragile leather or treated parchment that have simply perished long ago in the shifting sands. If such physical maps ever existed, they were the most closely held state secrets of the ancient world, completely hidden from the prying eyes of the Roman and Greek merchants who eagerly paid for their guidance. To supplement their mental and celestial maps, the Nabateans also left a subtle, physical trail of breadcrumbs across the wilderness. They built small, unobtrusive stone cairns on the high, shaded ridges, piles of rock that look entirely natural to an untrained foreign eye, but serve as clear, deliberate waypoints for a local guide. They scratched crude, abstract petroglyphs into the shadowed sides of the canyons, marking the turning points, warning of hostile tribal territories, or indicating the exact distance to the next concealed cistern. It is a quiet, secret language etched into the bones of the earth. Moving with slow, rhythmic certainty, the massive caravans glide through the darkness, entirely dependent on the sharp eyes and the deep memory of the men leading the front camels. The foreign merchants, wealthy beyond measure in their distant homelands, are reduced to helpless passengers in this alien environment. They must simply trust the guides, swallow their mounting anxiety, and follow the steady, swaying hips of the beasts ahead of them. Eventually, the endless dunes begin to flatten, the jagged rocks recede, and the distant flickering fires of a major trading hub pierce the dark horizon. The navigators have successfully conquered the void once again, yet safely arriving at a bustling, crowded intersection of the ancient world brings an entirely new set of massive logistical challenges. A moving caravan requires more than just a direction and a safe path. It needs sharp diplomats, strict accountants, and powerful local managers to handle the sudden, chaotic influx of foreign merchants and their heavy silver. Who holds these complex moving economies together when the caravans finally come to a halt? When the massive dust-choked caravans finally emerge from the deep, trackless void, they do not arrive at a simple watering hole. The major trading hubs of the Nabatean network, sprawling outposts like the southern city of Hegra, are fortified, highly complex economic engines. As thousands of exhausted dromedaries and weary men pour through the heavy timber gates of the caravanserais, the profound silence of the open desert is instantly shattered. The air fills with a chaotic symphony of grunting beasts, shouting merchants, and the frantic unloading of precious cargo. A moving city has suddenly come to a halt, and its sheer, crushing weight threatens to overwhelm the local infrastructure in a matter of hours. Yet the chaos is swiftly and masterfully subdued. The men who navigated the harsh wilderness step back, their grueling task complete. It is now, within the shaded, bustling courtyards of these great stone and tent complexes, that the women of the Nabatean elite step forward to assume command. They are the architects of order in a highly volatile environment. Managing the sudden influx of foreign wealth, exhausted animals, and desperate men requires a staggering level of logistical genius and sharp diplomacy. The women of these hubs do not merely sit on the periphery, they actively broker the vast localized trade deals that keep the international supply chain moving. They manage the heavy physical granaries, calculating the massive volume of barley and dried fodder required to revive a herd of 3,000 camels. They oversee the swift, organised repair of the heavy woven saddles and the leather water bladders, ensuring the merchants are fully equipped for the next punishing leg of their journey, northward. Their authority in these commercial centres is not an informal courtesy, but a deeply entrenched, legally protected reality. It is a mainstream historical fact that in major Nabatean settlements like Hegra, ancient inscriptions carved directly into the monumental stone facades explicitly record women independently owning massive commercial estates and elaborate tomb complexes. These legal texts, beautifully preserved in the arid climate, detail how these women held sole proprietary rights, complete with harsh financial penalty clauses for any unauthorized use or transfer of their assets. They command immense respect, acting as the primary financiers and local governors of the trade network's most vital intersections. The courtyard of the caravansary serves as their bustling boardroom. Here the air is thick with the scent of roasted mutton, bitter herbs, and the sweat of a dozen different nations. The Greek, Roman, Egyptian, and Syrian merchants who travel the incense route bring a chaotic clash of cultures, currencies, and languages. Tempers are notoriously short after weeks of marching under the lethal sun, and the potential for violent disputes over prices, stolen goods, or perceived insults is incredibly high. The Nabatean women act as the essential neutral diplomats. They maintain the strict cultural stability of the oasis, enforcing the peace through their absolute control over the vital resources. A merchant who draws a blade in anger within the walls of the caravansary quickly finds his supply of water and grain entirely severed, a quiet, non-violent enforcement of the law that commands total immediate obedience. Bridging the immense language barriers of this cosmopolitan trade requires profound ingenuity. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals that when dealing with foreign merchants who spoke a dizzying array of Mediterranean dialects, these female brokers often bypassed the spoken word entirely. They employed a highly sophisticated silent language of rapid hand gestures, combined with the slide of specialized weighed clay tokens across low wooden tables. Through this quiet, universally understood choreography of commerce, they could ruthlessly negotiate complex exchange rates, levy local taxes, and finalize massive contracts for fresh pack animals without speaking a single word of Greek or Latin. The extent of their organized power remains a deeply compelling mystery. Historians continue to debate whether these elite female brokers operated strictly within their own sprawling family networks, essentially acting as highly autonomous, immensely capable proxies for their absent husbands and fathers who were away guiding the caravans, or if they actually formed distinct, formalized female merchant guilds that independently controlled specific, highly lucrative sectors of the oasis economies. Regardless of their formal organizational structure, their grip on the local markets is absolute. They are the fixed points in a world defined by constant, exhausting motion. The physical and emotional toll of this responsibility is immense, yet it is borne with quiet, unflinching grace. While the foreign merchants sleep deeply on woven mats, recovering from the trauma of the dunes, the women remain awake. By the light of small oil lamps, they meticulously balance the mental and physical ledgers of the day. They calculate the silver taken in against the grain paid out. They tend to the sick, mixing bitter desert remedies for men who have collapsed from heat exhaustion. They are the steady, rhythmic heartbeat of the encampment, holding the fragile, localized economy together through sheer willpower and generational expertise. They provide the deep, emotional sanctuary that makes the brutal reality of the incense trade endurable for their own people. They preserve the ancient songs, weave the heavy textiles that tell the stories of the stars, and maintain the complex social webs that bind the nomadic tribes into a unified, powerful kingdom. They are the equal pillars of the empire, entirely responsible for turning the raw, harsh survival of the desert into a highly organized, staggeringly profitable civilization. Yet as the women carefully weigh the heavy silver denarii flowing into their coffers, a subtle shift begins to occur in the wider world. The system they manage is flawless, but the sheer cost of their success is slowly breeding a deep, dangerous resentment in the West. The Roman Empire is vastly wealthy, but it is not foolish. The continuous, agonizing drain of their silver to pay for the endless layers of Nabatean tolls, the exorbitant prices of the desert guides, and the heavy taxes of the way stations is pushing the Mediterranean merchants to the breaking point. They look out at the brutal, unyielding sand, and they look at the heavily guarded, expensive choke points of the overland route. The desert is locked down, utterly controlled by the masters of the hidden water. But as the financial pain sharpens, the frustrated foreigners inevitably cast their eyes toward a different horizon, seeking a way to bypass the sand entirely. If the terrestrial path was too tightly gripped by the desert dwellers, could the massive wooden ships of the Roman fleet simply sail down the treacherous, pirate-infested waters of the Red Sea and cut the Nabateans out of the trade forever? The immense frustration of the Roman Senate is a quiet, simmering force. For decades, the wealth of the Mediterranean has been systematically drained into the deep sands of Arabia, traded for the fragrant smoke that the empire simply cannot live without. The patricians and merchants of Rome, masters of the known world, deeply resent being held hostage by the meticulous, inescapable toll network of the desert dwellers. In their search for an alternative, they turn their gaze away from the punishing dunes and look toward the restless azure waters of the Red Sea. If the terrestrial path is too tightly gripped by the Nabateans, the Romans reason, perhaps their massive wooden ships can simply sail past the monopoly, bridging the vast distance between Egypt and the incense forests on the southern coast. Yet the Red Sea is not the placid, predictable Mediterranean. It is a wildly different, highly volatile environment. It is a mainstream historical fact that this narrow, elongated body of water was considered one of the most treacherous maritime routes in the ancient world, plagued by utterly erratic wind patterns and a sprawling, hidden labyrinth of razor-sharp coral reefs. The deep channels are incredibly narrow, forcing the heavy, deep-drafted Roman merchant vessels to sail perilously close to the jagged, unforgiving coastlines. For a foreign captain accustomed to open water, navigating this hostile sea is a terrifying game of chance, where a single sudden shift in the coastal breeze can easily drive a fortune in timber and cargo directly into the crushing rocks. The Nabateans watch this desperate maritime ambition with calm, calculating eyes. They understand that a successful sea route would severely undercut their entire civilization, bypassing the desert outposts entirely. To protect their absolute supremacy, the terrestrial masters must ensure that the waters remain a nightmare for their competitors. While the Desert Kingdom does not boast a massive organized imperial navy, they exert their influence over the coastline in a far more subtle and devastating manner. The shores of the Red Sea become a haven for maritime chaos. Local coastal tribes, intimately familiar with the hidden coves and the deadly shallows, actively prey upon the clumsy, heavily laden foreign ships. When the fierce winds inevitably stall, leaving a Roman vessel drifting helplessly near the shore, swift, shallow-drafted boats dart out from the hidden inlets. These raiders strip the becalmed ships of their silver and their precious cargo, disappearing back into the coastal haze before any imperial military escort can intervene. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals a deeply cunning, almost theatrical method of sabotage employed along these dark shores. Ancient mariners whispered terrified warnings of false signal fires blazing in the night. When a battered Roman ship caught in a blinding coastal storm desperately searched the black horizon for a safe, familiar harbour, they would occasionally spot the warm, inviting glow of a beacon. Trusting the light, the captain would steer toward what he believed was salvation, only to hear the sudden, catastrophic sound of splintering wood as the hull was torn apart by an uncharted, jagged reef. The fires were deliberately set by coastal wreckers, waiting patiently on the shore to easily harvest the floating ruin of the Roman ambition. The true orchestrators behind this systematic maritime sabotage remain a subject of deep scholarly intrigue. Historians continue to debate whether the Nabatean kings officially sanctioned and quietly funded these coastal pirates as a deliberate, hidden state strategy to ruthlessly crush any maritime competition, or if these attacks were simply the opportunistic, independent actions of local tribes taking advantage of a highly vulnerable shipping lane. Whatever the official truth, the ultimate result heavily favours the masters of the desert. The Red Sea route rapidly gains a terrifying reputation as a graveyard of ships and a black hole for imperial investment. For the wealthy merchant sitting in the safety of Alexandria, weighing his options, the economic calculation becomes painfully clear. The sea route offers a theoretical chance to bypass the heavy desert tolls, but it carries the very real, catastrophic risk of total financial ruin and heavy loss of life. The ocean is chaotic, utterly unpredictable, and intensely hostile. In stark contrast, the overland route offered by the Nabateans, while undeniably expensive, provides something the sea never can: absolute, unwavering certainty. This vital certainty is not built upon the shifting sands, but upon the quiet, meticulous administration of the desert way stations. When a merchant chooses the terrestrial path, he is essentially purchasing an ancient form of insurance, and the underwriters of this immense reliability are the women of the caravansaries. While the coastal waters churn with violence and splintering timber, the desert encampments remain oases of profound, highly organized calm. The women ensure that the hidden cisterns are always meticulously maintained, the granaries are accurately measured, and the heavy woven tents are secure against the brutal winds. A Roman merchant might groan under the weight of the tariffs he must pay to the matron of the oasis, but he knows with absolute certainty that he will receive the exact measure of water and safe harbour he has purchased. He knows his precious cargo of frankincense will not end up at the bottom of the sea. The women provide the unbreakable stability that anchors the entire international trade network. Their careful daily management ensures that the terrestrial route functions like a highly predictable mechanical engine. Against the wild, lethal gamble of the Red Sea, the steady, rhythmic march of the camel trains emerges as the only truly viable option for a serious merchant. The Roman ships are left to rot in the harbours, while the continuous flow of silver turns firmly back toward the deep dunes. The Nabateans successfully defend their monopoly, proving that an empire built on the mastery of the sand can easily outmaneuver an empire built on the mastery of the sea. The wealth continues to pour into the rose-red gorges of Petra, accumulating in staggering, unprecedented quantities. The temporary camps have permanently transformed into an opulent, cosmopolitan metropolis. Yet relying entirely on foreign silver coins to facilitate this massive economy presents a fundamental problem of identity and sovereignty. To truly stand as equals among the great powers of the ancient world, a society cannot simply hoard the money of others. They must declare their own economic independence. How does a society of former tent dwellers legitimize their vast fortunes and forge a sophisticated financial identity from the dust of the desert? For decades, the heavy, reinforced wooden chests carried into the rose-red rock of Petra hold a chaotic, glittering mix of international wealth. The Nabateans, through their absolute mastery of the desert logistics, have accumulated staggering hoards of foreign currency. They hold the silver owls of Athens, the heavy Ptolemaic eagles of Egypt, and the ubiquitous shining denarii of the Roman Republic. To the exhausted merchants who pay the tolls, silver is simply silver, a universal language of survival. Yet, for a society rapidly evolving from isolated tent dwellers into the undisputed masters of global trade, relying entirely on the money of other nations presents a profound limitation. A truly sovereign power cannot simply hoard the faces of foreign emperors. To legitimize their vast fortunes and forge a distinct identity, they must synthesize their own economic voice from the dust of the wasteland. The transition is a masterful display of statecraft. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Nabateans established their own sophisticated mints to strike independent silver and bronze coinage, a critical step that finalized their evolution into a highly formalized banking economy. They begin to melt down the chaotic influx of foreign silver, purifying the metal, and carefully restriking it with their own unique imagery and Aramaic inscriptions. This is not merely an economic convenience, it is a profound declaration of independence broadcast across the ancient world. Every time a Nabatean coin is handed to a Roman merchant in exchange for a water skin, it serves as a heavy, physical reminder that the desert belongs entirely to the people of the rock. The imagery chosen for this new currency is striking, deliberately breaking away from the established traditions of the Mediterranean powers. A truly fascinating and rather quirky historical tidbit reveals the astonishing, almost unflattering realism of their royal portraits. Unlike the idealized, godlike perfection demanded by Roman emperors or Greek kings, who often had themselves minted with flawless eternal youth, the Nabatean monarchs chose to be depicted with deeply human, grounded authenticity. Their coins feature figures with heavy curling locks of long hair, prominent noses, and distinct aging facial features that noticeably change over the decades of their reign. They do not present themselves as distant, untouchable deities, but as real, enduring figures who bear the actual weight of the harsh environment they command. More importantly, these coins reveal a profound truth about the internal structure of their society. In a practice exceedingly rare in the ancient world, Nabatean currency frequently features the profile of the queen minted squarely alongside the king. Often their faces are struck in a jugget style, overlapping one another as equal partners. This numismatic choice is not merely a polite symbolic gesture. It is a direct public reflection of the deeply entrenched economic power wielded by the women of the empire. The queens are displayed as the equal pillars of the state, just as the women of the caravanserais are the vital anchors of the trade routes. As this new sovereign currency floods the desert network, the role of the women in the distant way stations naturally evolves to meet the complexities of a formalised economy. They are no longer simply bartering dried dates and goat cheese for whatever foreign silver a desperate traveller happens to carry. They become the local administrators of a highly regulated monetary system. When a massive caravan arrives at the oasis, it is the matron of the encampment who must expertly manage the complex, localised exchange rates. She weighs the foreign coins, testing the purity of the silver, and dictates their value against the standard Nabatean currency. These women effectively operate the desert outposts as early, highly functioning branch banks. They hold secure deposits for travelling merchants, manage the strict accounting of the tolls, and ensure that the vital flow of capital remains steady and uncorrupted. Through their quiet, meticulous administration, the abstract concept of a kingdom-wide currency becomes a daily, functional reality. They transition seamlessly from the physical labour of survival to the sophisticated intellectual labour of finance, proving that their sharp, uncompromising intellect is just as crucial to the empire as the deep, hidden systems of water. The profound shift from bartering to banking naturally draws intense scrutiny from those who study the ancient world. Historians continue to debate whether the sudden, massive issuance of this independent currency was driven purely by the complex economic necessity of stabilising localised inflation and managing international exchange rates, or if it was a fiercely political act, a calculated, defiant display of absolute sovereignty meant to challenge the encroaching cultural dominance of Rome. Whatever the primary motivation, the result is an incredibly robust, self-sustaining, financial machine. Within the high, shadowed walls of Petra, this sophisticated banking economy reaches its absolute zenith. The capital transforms into a centre of high finance, where immense fortunes are managed not just in heavy sacks of physical silver, but through complex legal contracts, letters of credit, and strategic loans. The wealthy merchant families, guided heavily by their matriarchs, underwrite the massive, dangerous expeditions to the southern incense forests, spreading the financial risk and pooling their vast capital. They have successfully monetized the wasteland, taxed the world, and built a financial system that rivals the greatest cities of the Mediterranean. They have achieved the ultimate economic victory, turning the harsh, shifting sands into a permanent foundation of staggering wealth. The Nabateans stand as the proud, undisputed lords of the desert, their faces minted in silver and their storehouses overflowing with the fragrant resins of the south. Yet this unprecedented accumulation of capital brings an entirely new, terrifying vulnerability. The world is heavily armed, and wealth of this magnitude acts as an irresistible magnet for conquest. As the mountains of silver pile higher and the Nabatean kings proudly circulate their own sovereign currency, a dark, heavy shadow falls over the sand. A banking empire, no matter how brilliantly organised, cannot defend itself with accounting ledgers and silver coins alone. How does a nation of former nomads, heavily reliant on trade rather than massive standing armies, manage to hold back the most devastating, organised military machine the ancient world has ever seen without drawing a single sword? The shadow of the Roman eagle falls across the shifting dunes. By the turn of the 1st century, Rome has swallowed Greece, crushed Carthage, and annexed the fertile plains of Egypt. The Mediterranean is effectively a Roman lake, and the imperial gaze is forever scanning the horizon for new wealth to consume. Perched on the very edge of this insatiable empire, the Nabateans sit upon a mountain of foreign silver and fragrant resin. To a Roman general, the hidden city of Petra looks like the ultimate prize, a locked, rock-cut vault just waiting to be breached. Yet the masters of the desert understand a fundamental truth of ancient warfare. Swords, siege engines, and marching legions are incredibly expensive, but they are entirely useless if the men wielding them cannot drink. It is a mainstream historical fact that rather than engaging in suicidal open warfare against the highly disciplined Roman military machine, the Nabatean kings deliberately positioned their kingdom as a highly strategic, indispensable ally. They created a brilliant diplomatic shield woven from sheer economic leverage, strategic bribery, and absolute logistical dominance. They made the calculated decision that it was far cheaper to pay off the Romans and occasionally provide them with expert desert guides or swift auxiliary cavalry than to fight them. They purchased their sovereignty with the very silver they had taxed from the Roman merchants. They made themselves far too expensive to conquer and entirely too useful to destroy. When the Roman Senate finally decided to bypass the middlemen and send an army to conquer the southern incense forest directly, the Nabateans did not meet them on the battlefield. Instead, they used their profound mastery of the landscape as a weapon of mass deception. In the year 25 BC, the Roman prefect Aelius Gallus led an estimated 10,000 heavily armoured legionaries into the Arabian sands. To aid their allies, the Nabateans graciously offered their chief minister, a man named Silius, to serve as the expedition's supreme guide. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals the agonizing brilliance of this sabotage. Silius did not lead the Romans along the established survivable trade routes. Instead, he deliberately guided the unaccustomed legions in exhausting circuitous loops through the most brutal, waterless stretches of the wasteland. He marched them along treacherous, jagged coastlines and through barren rock fields, keeping them just far enough from the hidden cisterns to ensure their continuous suffering. The mighty Roman army simply collapsed under the terrifying heat, decimated by thirst, scurvy and exhaustion, completely neutralizing a massive invasion force without a single Nabatean soldier ever needing to draw a blade. This masterstroke of geographical warfare remains a subject of intense scrutiny. Historians continue to debate whether Silius acted on direct secret orders from the Nabatean throne, executing a brilliant state-sponsored conspiracy to protect their terrestrial monopoly, or if he was simply an ambitious rogue minister acting entirely on his own chaotic initiative to eliminate rival southern tribes. Regardless of the exact motive, the Roman Senate learned a terrifying, permanent lesson. The deep desert could not be conquered by force of arms. The legions retreated, and the diplomatic shield of the Nabateans held firm. Behind these grand, high-stakes political maneuvers and the slow starvation of Roman armies, the true stability of this diplomatic shield is quietly maintained by the elite women of the kingdom. Alliances in the ancient world are rarely forged purely on parchment. They are bound by blood, marriage, and deep cultural exchange. The royal and aristocratic women serve as the vital ambassadors of this enduring peace. When treaties must be struck with neighbouring nomadic confederations or powerful Judean dynasties to secure the fragile borders, it is the Nabatean princesses and matriarchs who cross the sands, weaving complex webs of familial loyalty that hold the volatile region together. If the surrounding tribes were to fracture into civil war, Rome would immediately exploit the division to march into the territory. The women prevent this. They settle internal disputes, manage the sprawling networks of extended families, and ensure that the Nabateans present a unified, unbreakable front to the outside world. Their quiet diplomacy in the deep desert is just as crucial to the kingdom's defence as the towering sandstone walls of the Sick. Within the grand, rock-cut dining halls of Petra, known as triclinia, this soft power is elevated to high art. Here, the matriarchs of the great merchant houses host foreign dignitaries, Roman envoys and wealthy trading partners. They orchestrate the delicate, high-level hospitality that is absolutely crucial to ancient statecraft. They control the social environment, projecting immense cultural sophistication through the serving of fine imported wines, the burning of the purest frankincense, and the display of staggering wealth. By managing these lavish gatherings, the women also cultivate intricate networks of spies and informants that naturally gather in such a cosmopolitan hub. They listen to the whispers of the Greek merchants and the boastful talk of Roman officers, quietly gathering the critical intelligence the king needs to constantly outmaneuver the empire next door. They are the quiet architects of the kingdom's leverage, proving that a well-timed gift or a carefully negotiated marriage can often deflect a legion just as effectively as a barricade. Through this brilliant synthesis of geographical defence and cultural diplomacy, the wealth of the Nabateans remains entirely secure. The Roman legions are kept at bay, pacified by luxury and deterred by the lethal sands. Petra, the hidden vault, grows from a temporary sanctuary into a sprawling permanent metropolis. The magnificent rock-cut facades multiply along the canyon walls, the population swells to tens of thousands, and the city thrives in a state of carefully managed peace. Yet this unprecedented urban success creates a terrifying, deeply practical paradox. The Nabateans have built a magnificent city of stone, populated by a massive citizenry of merchants, artisans, and diplomats, completely hidden within a barren, sun-baked canyon. They have vast reserves of water, perfectly captured in their hidden cisterns. But humans cannot live on water and silver alone. In a rocky wasteland devoid of rolling green pastures or vast, flooded river valleys, the sheer biological arithmetic of daily survival is incredibly daunting. How does a society miraculously pull enough food from the cracked, dry earth to feed a massive cosmopolitan metropolis trapped in the heart of the desert? The sheer biological arithmetic of feeding the capital city is a staggering problem. The hidden rock-cut metropolis of Petra is a triumph of wealth and defensive geography, but a towering wall of sandstone cannot produce a single grain of wheat. By the 1st century, the city has swelled to support tens of thousands of inhabitants. This dense, cosmopolitan population of wealthy merchants, skilled stonecutters, foreign diplomats, and their vast herds of pack animals requires a constant, massive influx of calories. In a landscape devoid of rolling green plains or predictable flooding river valleys, the threat of mass starvation is just as deadly as any Roman legion. The desert does not naturally yield a surplus. To sustain this magnificent urban experiment, the Nabateans must engineer a miracle of stone and soil. They do not look outward for salvation, they look directly into the dry, rocky canyons that surround their capital. The solution to their immense hunger relies on the exact same hydraulic genius that fuels their deep desert trade routes. It is a mainstream historical fact that the Nabateans transformed the arid hinterlands of Petra into a sprawling, highly productive agricultural zone through the relentless construction of stepped, terraced farming. They recognized that the violent, fleeting winter flash floods that tore through the wadis were carrying away the most precious resource of all, the nutrient-rich topsoil. To capture this fleeting lifeblood, they build thousands of low, sturdy stone walls directly across the dry riverbeds and along the steep, rocky slopes. These subtle check dams are not designed to stop the water completely, but to gently slow its violent rush. As the floodwaters hit these stone barriers, the heavy silt and organic matter settle behind the walls, while the excess water is carefully directed into nearby cisterns. Over years of patient accumulation, these small trapped pockets of dirt become deep, fertile ribbons of arable land, completely entirely manufactured by human hands. They literally build their farm fields from the dust, step by agonizing step, turning the jagged, barren canyons into ribbons of vibrant green. Within the cool, shadowed storage chambers carved deep into the sandstone cliffs, the true stewards of this agricultural miracle are found. The Nabatean women managed the immense, localized supply chains required to feed the booming metropolis. Harvesting the grain from the narrow terraces is only the beginning of the grueling physical process. The raw wheat and barley must be transformed into edible sustenance, an exhausting daily labor that forms the absolute caloric foundation of the entire city. The women operate the heavy black basalt quern stones, grinding the grain with a steady rhythmic endurance. They oversee the intricate subterranean pantries where the cool dry air of the rock preserves the precious yields for the long, punishing summer months. They cure the local meats, carefully dry the heavy clusters of grapes into raisins, and manage the complex rationing of the municipal food supply. Without their strict, uncompromising management of the granaries, the concentrated wealth of the incense trade would quickly become irrelevant. A merchant cannot eat his silver. The women provide the profound stability that allows the great trading houses to focus on the distant horizons, secure in the knowledge that their families and their labourers will not starve in the hidden valley. Their botanical expertise extends far beyond mere survival. The harsh, sun-baked climate forces a unique adaptation in their diet, leading to a rather quirky historical tidbit regarding their culinary habits. The famous Greek geographer Strabo, writing about the Nabateans, noted with great surprise that despite their massive wealth and proximity to the Mediterranean, they did not cultivate the olive tree, the absolute staple of the Roman and Greek world. Instead, they relied heavily on sesame seeds for their cooking oil. The immense physical effort required to grow, harvest, and press millions of tiny sesame seeds in massive stone mills highlights their incredible dedication to extracting maximum value from plants that could endure the unforgiving heat of the desert sun. They created a distinct, localized cuisine, proudly independent of the powerful empires that surrounded them. The exact nature of how this vast agricultural network was initiated remains a subject of intense academic focus. Historians continue to debate whether this sudden, massive explosion of terraced farming was a highly coordinated, state-planned initiative directed by the Nabatean kings to ensure the food security of their growing capital, or if it evolved slowly and organically, driven by fiercely independent local families gradually expanding their own winter gardens over multiple generations. Regardless of the origin, the result is a perfectly balanced, localized ecosystem. The same rain that fills the hidden cisterns for the thirsty caravans also waters the heavy heads of barley in the manufactured fields. The city of Petra thrives, a true jewel of human ingenuity locked within a fortress of stone. The Nabateans have achieved the impossible. They have monopolized the most lucrative trade route on Earth, forged their own sovereign currency, held the mighty Roman legions at bay, and pulled a bounty of food from the barren rocks. They sit at the absolute pinnacle of their power, rich beyond measure, insulated from the chaos of the ancient world. The scent of frankincense drifts from their grand altars, and the steady clinking sound of foreign silver echoes through the narrow canyon of the Sick. The system they have built is a flawless, self-sustaining machine, perfectly adapted to the hostility of the deep desert. They have mastered the sand, the water, and the stone. But a civilization built entirely on the flow of transit is inherently vulnerable to the whims of the wider world. The Nabateans control the roads, but they do not control the winds. What happens to the undisputed masters of the overland caravan when the sailors of the Mediterranean finally decipher the secret rhythms of the sea, and the great wooden ships learn to bypass the desert entirely? The immense wooden ships of the Roman fleet, once trapped in the shallow, treacherous coastal waters of the Red Sea, finally break free. For generations, the empire of the Mediterranean had been forced to pay the heavy tolls of the desert, bound by their ignorance of the vast oceans. But human ambition, especially when fueled by the insatiable desire for wealth, is a relentless force. They do not conquer the Nabateans with marching legions or ringing steel. They conquer them with a profound discovery in the sky. It is a mainstream historical fact that by the middle of the 1st century, Greek and Roman sailors finally unlocked the secret of the monsoon winds. They realized that the terrifying, violent gales sweeping across the Indian Ocean were not random chaos, but a massive, predictable, seasonal engine. From the ports of Egypt, a heavy merchant vessel could catch the summer winds and sail directly across the deep, open water straight to the fragrant coasts of southern Arabia and India. In the winter, the winds reversed, carrying the heavy holds of frankincense, myrrh, and eastern silks safely back to the empire. This daring open ocean voyage bypassed the lethal coastal reefs entirely, but it remained a terrifying leap of faith into the unknown blue. A rather quirky historical tidbit reveals the ingenious, humble tools these ancient mariners used to survive the blinding isolation of the sea. When the heavy seasonal storm clouds completely obscured the guiding stars, the captains relied on a much older navigational technology. They carried cages of land-finding birds. If the ship was hopelessly lost in the monsoon haze, a sailor would release a crow or a raven into the howling wind. If the bird circled and returned to the rigging, the ocean was empty. But if the bird caught a scent and flew straight toward the unseen horizon, the captain knew exactly where the safe harbour lay. With the open sea finally conquered, the absolute necessity of the terrestrial route is instantly broken. A single massive Roman cargo ship can carry more frankincense in one voyage than 1,000 groaning camels can drag across the sands in a month. The sheer economics of scale are devastating. The ships are incredibly dangerous, but they are completely free from the endless layers of Nabatean taxation. Deep in the Arabian interior, the masters of the desert do not hear the splash of the oars or the snapping of the heavy canvas sails, but they feel the immediate crushing impact of the shifting tides. The great way stations, once bustling with the chaotic noise of a dozen different nations, begin to grow quiet. The women of the encampments look out across the shimmering heat haze, waiting for the familiar towering dust clouds that signal the arrival of the merchant trains. But the horizon remains empty. The flow of foreign silver slows to a mere trickle, and the deep hidden cisterns hold more water than the passing beasts require. In the grand rose-red capital of Petra, the monumental rock-cut facades still stand in breathtaking defiance of the barren landscape, but the lifeblood of the city is slowly draining away. The Nabateans are not suddenly destroyed by a violent siege or a bloody conquest. Instead, they are quietly, economically bypassed. By the time the Roman Empire formally annexes the kingdom in the year 106, absorbing it into the province of Arabia Petraea, the transition is largely peaceful. The true economic power has already migrated to the coastlines. Yet the ultimate fate of this magnificent city of stone remains wrapped in a veil of sand and time. Historians continue to debate whether the slow, suffocating shift of global trade routes was the primary cause of the kingdom's gradual abandonment, or if a series of massive late antiquity earthquakes dealt the final fatal blow, irreparably shattering the delicate, hidden water infrastructure that made urban life in the deep desert possible. Through this long, twilight fading of the empire, the women of the Nabatean valleys remain the steady, unbroken anchor of their people. They do not panic as the vast wealth evaporates. Instead, they gracefully guide their families through the quiet transition. They rely once again on the deep ancestral knowledge of survival. The grand international commerce shrinks, but the terraced gardens still need tending. The matriarchs, who once negotiated heavy silver contracts with Roman patricians, calmly return to the quiet, dignified rhythms of the earth. They cultivate the tough barley, press the sesame seeds, and weave the stories of their golden age into the heavy, dark fabrics of their tents. They preserve the memory of the great caravans, ensuring that the legacy of their monumental endurance is never completely lost to the wind. Now, the relentless march of the centuries slows, and the ancient sun gently dips below the jagged sandstone peaks. The bustling, chaotic markets of the ancient world have fallen silent. The heavy wooden chests of silver have long since emptied, and the sweet, lingering smoke of the temple altars has finally dissolved into the cool night air. You can let go of the dry, shifting sands and the heavy burdens of the day. The journey is complete. The immense, exhausting efforts of the past, the carving of the deep stone, the endless, rhythmic walking of the great beasts, and the quiet, watchful waiting at the desert wells are all finished. They rest now beneath the quiet blanket of history, and so too can you. Imagine the deep, sheltering silence of a canyon at midnight. The wind no longer howls, it merely breathes, a soft, rhythmic whisper, brushing against the smooth, rose-red cliffs. The sky above is a vast velvet canopy, completely clear and undisturbed, scattered with the very same brilliant, eternal stars that once guided the ancient navigators safely home. There is nothing left to carry. The hidden cisterns are full, the gates are securely closed, and the weary travellers have finally found their sanctuary. You are safe in this quiet, enduring stillness. Let the ancient world fade into the gentle shadows, allowing the calm of the deep desert night to settle softly over your mind.